Hello, it's Matthew here, and welcome to FestiveTechCalendar 2022. Happy holidays. And today I'm going to talk about all I want for Christmas is my two-factor authentication to be stronger. So let's dig into that, shall we? So as I said, my name is Matthew, and I'm a principal architect at MB Consult. I am an identity and access and security and governance SME. I have 4 years. This is my fourth year as a Microsoft Enterprise Mobility MVP, and I'm also a dad to two boys, a husband, and a dog walker. Now, let's get into what we're going to do today. So today we're going to look at how we generally require MFA, multi-factor authentication, and then we'll look at the different types of credentials that we can use as an MFA and the strengths associated with those credentials. And we'll look at some of the vulnerabilities of those credentials and why we want to look at getting stronger MFA, why we need to have stronger MFA. And then I'll introduce authentication strengths and give you a quick demo. And then recap. So to start off with, we all recognize this diagram. This graphic comes from Microsoft documentation around the policy engine for Microsoft's implementation of Zero Trust, also known as conditional access. Now, one of the typical requirements for conditional access policies, in fact, 35% of all conditional access policies are policies that require MFA or multi-factor authentication in order to access the apps and data. So conditional access takes signals from the user identity, the device they're on, the network they're connected to, and some of the real-time risk information and machine learning, and pass those signals through to the conditional access policy engine, where they're evaluated, and depending on those signals and the conditions, either allow access or require MFA or block access. There are other things you can do with conditional access policies, obviously. The other way that we implement multi-factor authentication is through security defaults if we don't have conditional access policies. So, for example, if we have an Azure Active Directory tenant that is not a Premium P1 or Premium P2 licensed tenant. Now, we know for a fact that 99.9% of account compromises are prevented by enabling multi-factor authentication. So the compromise of accounts with MFA is less than 0.1% of the general account population. But MFA is attacked, and as more organizations adopt MFA, the attacks on MFA will be evolving. So let's have a look at the different credential types. Now we know that just having a username and password is bad. So we want to move away from legacy authentication protocols, basic authentication, where you are just required to supply username and password. And the next level up are where we get into MFA. So the first two credentials are SMS or text messages and voice calls. Now, text messages go over the public switched telephony networks. They're controlled by those telephony channels, as well as voice. SMS, we know we get a 6-digit code on our mobile phone via text message, and we have to enter that code into the screen that is prompting us for multi-factor authentication. Now with voice, we get a phone call from Microsoft asking us to verify our identity, and in doing so, we're requested to press the pound key or the hash key or the number 1 or something that has been pre-programmed. Then we have the better authentication methods are the Authenticator, the Microsoft Authenticator, with push notifications enabled. So that is that we have the Authenticator app installed on our device, and when we try to sign into a service that requires multi-factor authentication, we get a notification on our phone to approve or deny the request. And we typically approve, and we're in. Then we've got software tokens or software token OTPs. Those are your third-party authenticator applications that display a 6-digit one-time passcode on the device. Similar to that are the hardware tokens. And now the hardware token OTPs are, if you think of an RSA token with a rolling code displayed on a screen, or it's a device where you have to press a button and the code pops up. Those are the hardware token OTPs. Then better than that, we get the authenticator phone sign-in. So that's where we're not using a password. So you can see at the top there, it says passwordless. So we're not using a password. We're just signing in with the Authenticator app. So we enter our username and immediately it pops up with a 2-digit code on the screen, and it asks us to enter that same 2-digit code into the Authenticator app and approve the sign-in. That's passwordless phone sign-in. Then we have Windows Hello, which is reliant on the trusted platform module or the TPM chip on our Windows devices. And then we can authenticate using a fingerprint or a Face ID biometric, as well as a PIN to get into our Windows device. And that is seen as a strong authentication method. And so that satisfies multi-factor authentication requirements. The next one is the FIDO2 security keys. Now I have one here that I can show you to the camera. In fact, I have two. These are by Ubico, and they're FIDO2 compliant or standard, and you get many of them, but they are essentially also passwordless because I can sign in with the security key without entering my password. But it can also be used as a multi-factor or another factor for MFA. The other one, which is new, well, it's not new, but certificate-based authentication traditionally requires on-premises infrastructure such as Active Directory Federation services and certificate authorities for you to be able to sign in with a certificate, a user certificate or a device certificate. New to Azure Active Directory in the last couple of months is certificate-based authentication, which with Azure Active Directory, which means that you can have certificate-based authentication without the Active Directory Federation Services or ADFS requirement and certificate authorities. So that's a new thing, and that's great that we can now allow certificate-based authentication natively in cloud-only organizations. Now let's get into some of the credentials and how they can be vulnerable. So in this table, I've listed some of the credentials that we've spoken about, and then we've got whether they're phish resistant or not, and then jackable. Now, phishable means that an intercept and replay of the authentication messages using a machine in the middle attack. So the machine simulates the server, a user tries to authenticate and passes the messaging through to the actual server, and then passes the messages from the server back to the user through the machine in the middle, but capturing all of the information in between. So it's real-time phishing. The other thing is the channel, which is the mobile operators, the infrastructure, the customer support, and the SIM infrastructure. That is all referred to as the channel, and the channel can be jacked, or channel jacking is essentially a low-cost attack involving takeover of the communication channel used for the authentication method. So we've got SMS, one-time pins. Now we know that it is on a channel that is highly jackable, so it's not good, and also it's not phish resistant. So hence the little orange face. The next one is voice, because it runs on the same channel, mobile operators. We can't trust that channel, so it is jackable, and it's not phish resistant. Microsoft Authenticator, it is prevented from jacking, channel jacking, with an asterisk though, and the asterisk applies to the fact that if you are making a backup of your device and you include the private keys in that backup, if that backup crosses over one of the channels, the public switch telephony network channels, that backup can be intercepted, and the private keys are then available to that machine in the middle, or that nefarious attacker. The authenticator on its own is not phish resistant. So Windows Hello is phish resistant and protected from jacking, and that's because nothing gets transferred over the wire from the TPM chip. When you access the TPM chip, you access the credentials locally on the machine, and it doesn't pass any passwords or anything over the wire to the service. And similarly with FIDO2 keys, they're not jackable and therefore are phish resistant. Now, it's time for us to hang up the phone. So put down those verification methods, or stop using those verification methods that rely on the public telephony networks, and stop using SMS and voice. And also, the US federal executive order from early this year calls to improve the United States' national cybersecurity by addressing the weaknesses of the traditional MFA methods, and actually mandates the usage of phishing-resistant MFA. So with conditional access and authentication strengths, where these allow us to differentiate between these different methods and use the most secure methods for the most sensitive resources. So I'm going to get into a little demo, but before I get into the demo, I just want to explain how my environment is set up. So I've essentially got 3 demo users that I'm going to show various different experiences to you. And they've got different verification methods set up. So you can see Adele in sales. She's only got the phone number registered for SMS verification. Then we've got Alex, who's also a sales user. He's got SMS as a verification method, as well as the Authenticator app. And then I've got Alan, who is a global admin, but he's got SMS as a verification method, the Microsoft Authenticator using push notification, and a YubiKey security key. So he's got choices of verification methods. Okay, so here I am in the Entra portal. So I like going into the Entra portal as opposed to the Azure Active Directory portal. You can obviously get to the same settings, but I find that I prefer the way that the Entra portal is organized for Azure Active Directory. Often I find if I'm going through the Azure Active Directory portal, for example, if I need to go to conditional access policies, I go to Azure Active Directory, then I have to go to security, then I go to conditional access policies. Whereas in the Entra portal, I've got the common entry points for Azure Active Directory listed here in this nav panel. So from here, I'm just going to show you my users that I spoke about earlier in leading up to this demo. So if you recall, I've got the 3 users, Adele. Now I'm going to show you that Adele, if you go to authentication methods, only has one authentication method. I lie. She has a temporary access pass, but it has been used. And in fact, I'm going to delete that because that was obviously there from a previous demo. So Adele only has her phone number registered for SMS authentication. Now, if I go back and have a look at Alex and look at Alex's authentication methods, Alex has 2 authentication methods. He has his phone number and software OAuth token. And it says it's in preview because it's being managed by authentication methods. And I'll show you that in a second. But this is basically a third-party authenticator application on his phone. And then Alan, our global administrator, has got a phone number so that he can receive SMSs, a FIDO2 security key, and the Microsoft Authenticator, most likely configured for for push notifications. Okay, so then I'm going to show you the authentication strengths. So if I go down to authentication methods and go to authentication strengths, you will see, and this is now in all tenants. It is in preview, but it is available in most of the tenants that I've had a look at. So it comes with these built-in authentication strength policies. Now, the multi-factor authentication policy that you see here is the equivalent to the standard MFA. So if you look at your conditional access policies and they require MFA, there is an MFA requirement, but we can switch that out to an authentication strength and use multi-factor authentication, which is exactly the same. We can do a little search here, and we can filter just by looking at password plus SMS, for example. If I apply that, and that multi-factor authentication built-in policy is the only one that shows up. What we can also do is, if we look at multi-factor authentication, we notice here it says Windows Hello for Business and 16 more. So there's 17 authentication methods or authentication flows, and they're listed here. They're listed from top to bottom, securest to weakest. So from the strongest authentication method to the weakest. So Windows Hello for Business is arguably what Microsoft are saying is the strongest authentication method. Okay, and then there's the other authentication methods. Now, what you can also do is you can have a look at these authentication methods and manage them using Microsoft Graph. So I'm going to just go to the Graph Explorer, and I'm going to copy a string to query using Graph Explorer the built-in policies. So I'm going to paste in here. And I just want to make sure I am authenticated to my tenant, which I am. And if I run this as a get, right, and expand this so that you can see, this is where it lists the multi-factor authentication, the built-in policy. It's a combination of methods that satisfy strong authentication, such as a password and SMS. And it lists them. It lists the authentication methods here from strongest to weakest. Then further down, we've got the passwordless MFA. So that includes Windows Hello for Business, FIDO2, the X509 certificate MFA, so certificate-based authentication, and device-based push, which is the phone passwordless sign-in or passwordless phone sign-in. And then we've got phishing-resistant MFA defined for us by the built-in policies. Now you'll notice that there's only 3 factors there, or 3 credentials that it accepts as phishing-resistant. And note that device-based push is not included in phishing-resistant MFA. Okay, so these can obviously be modified. Well, you can create new policies, your own policies using the graph, but for today, I'm going to just demonstrate with the portal. Let's go back to the portal. And I'm going to look at my existing conditional access policies. Now, this tenant I set up with conditional access policies, common conditional access policies that are used throughout organizations today. And I actually used the policies from template. If you don't know about that, you can create policies that are for common scenarios based off of a template. They either apply to identities and devices, and there are 14 conditional access policies that you could deploy in a matter of minutes by using these templates. I'll just show you an example. I can request multi-factor authentication for admins, or securing security info registration, etc., etc. Okay. I am not going to create a new conditional access policy right now, but I just want to show you that I have my existing conditional access policies, and they all typically require MFA. So if I go to the controls section, they require MFA, or multi-factor authentication. And it applies to, in this case, my administrators. Maybe my break glass account is excluded, and you should absolutely be excluding break glass accounts. Okay, there are a couple of other conditional access policies. Majority of them require multi-factor authentication for something, but we'll come back to these. What I want to show you now is that if I log in as Adele, who is a regular sales user, but she's only got the SMS authentication method registered. So I'm going to go over here to Office, right? And I'm going to sign in as Adele with the password now. Okay, so now Adele has been requested to MFA, and the only option she has is using a text. So I'm going to text, and that's going to send a text message to her phone, and she then enters code that is sent to her via SMS, and she signed in, right? And we can remember that stay signed in, and that's it. Adele is in. She can carry on with her work, do her work. All right. Okay, nothing new there. I'm just showing you the experience as it is currently. Then I'm also going to show you what happens if my global administrator signs in. So I'm going to log into Office as well. Oops, I think I double-clicked that, but it's all right. And I'm typing in as Alan, right? Entering password. Now, Alan is being asked to authenticate using the pop-up on his mobile device. So the pop-up on the device says approve the sign-in, and I need to enter that code. And incidentally, there are other strong credentials or extra context in the prompt, and it's telling me the application as well as the location. Now, that's something else that you can enable, but I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm just going to enter the code 44 and say, yes, it's me, and approve, and I am now in, right? So I'm the global admin, and I've satisfied the multi-factor authentication requirement. Okay, so that's just demonstrating the current experience for the users. Now let's go and change the conditional access policy CA001, which is for administrators. So instead of just requiring the traditional require MFA, I'm going to uncheck that and check require authentication strength preview. Now, we've only got the 3 built-in policies listed. And because this is a global admin or a policy that applies to administrators, I'm going to require phishing resistant multi-factor authentication, which was that built-in policy. Okay, I'm going to click save and save. Right, so all I've done is change MFA to phishing resistant MFA. Right, we need some time for that policy to kick in. It takes about 5 minutes. So in the meantime, I'm going to go and create a custom authentication policy, or authentication strength, should I say. So back over in authentication methods under authentication strengths, I can absolutely click plus and create a new authentication strength, and I can go and select which credential I will allow in that authentication strength. I'm going to cancel this though, because I want to show you a neat trick. If I click on the ellipsis on my existing policies, like multi-factor authentication, for example, I can duplicate that. And then while I'm creating it, pick and choose the credentials that I don't want that are included in the one that I've duplicated. So I'm going to call this MFA. Oh, hang on a second. MFA without SMS and voice. Right? We want to hang up the phone. And so we can see that we've got phishing resistant MFAs, so credentials, those we want. Passwordless, yes, we do want. And then under the 13 multi-factor authentication methods, we're going to untick password and SMS and password and voice. So we're left with the other authentication methods. Yes, we've got federated multi-factor authentication. If we have Active Directory Federation services, we can still use those federated MFAs, but we also are excluding any single-factor authentication methods. Click next. This just gives you a review so that we can check them, and click create. So essentially we should have 15 verification methods now in our custom policy. So there it says Windows Hello for Business and 14 more. So there we have our 15. Okay, then I'm going to go back to conditional access policies, and now I'm going to change the policy that should apply to our users. Right? Remember, sales users like Adele was able to log in with an SMS. I'm now going to change this so that we're removing that SMS capability. So I go to the controls section and I untick require multi-factor authentication like we did earlier and require authentication strength. And now because I have a custom authentication strength defined, it pops to the top of the list. So I can choose that by default. But I could choose any of the other multi-factor authentication methods, built-in strengths that we have. So I'm going to choose multi-factor authentication, but without SMS. Please excuse the barking dogs in the background. Right, save that. Okay, now let's go and test if our administrator, Alan, is still able to sign in because he's a global administrator and what that experience will be. So let's get a new in private window going. And for a change, I'm going to go to portal.com. And I'm going to sign in as an password. So now you can see, we saw earlier that Alan was able to sign in using the push notification on his phone. He doesn't have that option anymore. He can only sign in with a security key. Now, Alan does have a security key registered, and that's why it's showing up as an option. If he didn't have one registered, it wouldn't show up and he wouldn't be able to sign in. It would prompt him for more, to register more credentials. So use a security key. Going to enter my security key or insert it. Enter the PIN into the secure enclave on the PIN. On the security key. Touch the key as well, and I'm in. Okay, so Alan is now able to sign in as a global administrator, but he was only able to provide one type of verification method, and that was a phishing-resistant method. He could have signed in with that security key, and then he wouldn't have been prompted for an additional verification method because the security keys are phish-resistant and passwordless. Okay, so that's the experience for the admins. So after we change that conditional access policy. Now let's try and sign in to Office with Alex's account. Now, remember, Alex has got multiple verification methods. He's not an admin, so the admin conditional access policy shouldn't apply to Alex. Signing as Alex. And now you can see that Alex is being asked to verify his credential with a verification code. It is not allowing him to use an SMS, and it's not prompting him on his phone. So we don't have any other option. In some instances, there's the sign in another way, but in this case, he doesn't have any other option but a verification code from his Authenticator app. Now, in this case, it's not the Microsoft Authenticator app, it's a third-party app, but it's still a software-based OTP. So in my case, I'm using 1Password for this demo, and that works. And Alex is able to sign in. Great stuff. Okay, now let's see what happens with Adele. Now remember, Adele has only got the SMS method as a multi-factor authentication method. And remember our conditional access policy is MFA but without SMS. So let's go to Office. Enter Adele's credentials. So Adele enters her password. And it immediately says you need to register more. Your organization needs more information to keep your account secure. So you need to complete multi-factor authentication before you'll be able to register more authentication methods. So I think Adele is going to be stuck here because she can't MFA to satisfy the requirement to register, and she can't get in. So yeah, we're just going to keep getting prompted like this. So Adele is now, I suppose, in a bit of a scenario. She could either contact her administrator, and the administrator could exempt her from that conditional access policy, which is what happens in a lot of organizations. The administrator will add her to the exception list for that conditional access policy, or take her out of a security group if it's being applied to a group. But it's a temporary thing, but 9 times out of 10, the administrator gets busy with other things and forgets, and then Adele never sees this conditional access policy requesting MFA again. So the account is potentially now insecure. It's vulnerable. A better option would be to use a temporary access pass, which is also a new feature that allows her to sign in with a one-time passcode. Let's do that for Adele and show you what that experience is. So back as the administrator, I'm going to go to Adele's account. Now, I can be a global administrator, a user administrator, or an authentication administrator in order to issue a temporary access pass. So I go to Add Authentication Method under Authentication Methods and choose Temporary Access Pass. And I'm going to make this just a temporary thing. So obviously we have a slider. We can stipulate how long this temporary access pass is valid for. I'm going to keep it at 1 hour. That's the minimum. And make it a one-time use pass. So I guess I could keep it as it can be reused, but it would only be valid for however long I've specified on the slider. And I can also specify what time that time starts, that timer. But we're going to do this immediately. So I'm going to create a temporary access pass that's valid for 1 hour, but as soon as she uses it, it's invalidated. So adding, and there's the pass. So I'll just copy that. And it's suggesting to the administrator to get the user to go to my security info to register another authentication method. So Adele can do that. So if we go new in private and go my security info, and log in as L. It immediately recognizes that a temporary access pass has been generated for her account. And so now I can enter that using my multi-clipboard keyboard and sign in with the temporary access pass. And I'm signed in successfully, right? But it'll take me directly to the security info where I can register another multi-factor authentication method. Now, note the banner at the top. To maintain access to your account, add a sign-in method. Now, if I click on that add a sign-in method, it's the same as clicking on add sign-in method here. It's going to prompt me to choose a more secure method than what I have to register. So I can register the Authenticator app or a security key. So it's prompting me to register a more secure method. And if I go Authenticator app and go add, it'll go through the wizard of prompting me to download and install it on my phone and registering the Authenticator app. I can use a different Authenticator app like the Google Authenticator or Authy or one of the other supported software OAuth applications. I'm not actually going to do that. That's the demo essentially for Adele. She could have used the temporary access password to get into Office, but it would have been a one-time only thing. So she could have signed in and done her work if that's what she needed. But it's suggested that she go to the security info page and register a stronger credential. So now we've eliminated SMS as a verification method, and we can actually switch that off either in the legacy MFA portal or the new authentication policies portal, which is what I mentioned earlier. This is where we get policies, and in the future, Microsoft are going to allow you to manage authentication policies from this panel rather than in the self-service password reset panel or the legacy, what I call the legacy multi-factor authentication services. So this is where we would control that. We can also get external guests to use phishing resistant MFA. And so let's have a look at that. Just bear in mind that this tenant has been configured to trust multi-factor authentication from Azure AD tenants. So what that means is wherever the guest is homed, their tenant might be requiring multi-factor authentication, and we will trust that multi-factor authentication. It'll come across as a claim to our tenant, and we'll accept that claim as multi-factor authentication. What that means is that guests don't have to register in my tenant multi-factor authentication credentials. In fact, I can show you that. So my user, my actual real life user, Matthew, is an external guest. Okay, you can see it's a guest. And if I go in and have a look at authentication methods, I haven't registered any authentication methods on the Contoso tenant for MFA. Now, to demo this, Matthew has been added to a Teams channel in the Contoso organization. So I'm just going to browse the Teams channel. And open it using the web app instead. Right, and now I'm going to sign in with my Matthew account. Okay, and I'm immediately being prompted to sign in or to authenticate using my Authenticator app. Now this is passwordless phone sign-in. I didn't enter a password, and you remember that passwordless phone sign-in is use a device notification, push notification. Enter the code, and I am signed in. No, wait, I am not signed in. I am now still being required to provide another verification method, and in this case, it can only be a security key. That's because I have a security key registered in my tenant. And that's the phishing resistant method. Remember, phone sign-in is not phishing resistant. So I'm going to use the security key, the UB key that maybe Contoso has issued to me, and I've registered it in my own home tenant, or it's my home company that's all issued me with a key, and I can use that key. Enter the PIN and touch the key, and now I am in. And hopefully, eventually, I get into the Teams channel as the guest account. There you go. So I've signed in as a guest to the Contoso team with my username, Matthew Levy, as a guest. And there you have it. Okay, well, there you have it, my demonstration. These authentication strengths can help expedite our passwordless journey. So it can maybe be used to try and encourage our users to register Windows Hello or the Microsoft Authenticator and FIDO2 security keys. Just bear in mind that Windows Hello and the Authenticator signing in, passwordless phone sign-in, can't be set up in an interrupt authentication flow. So from conditional access policies, it requires the user to have registered and configured that credential first to be able to sign in. And also Hello for Business requires a working environment, Intune, key trusts, etc. So just to recap, I can't stress this more, but MFA is better than no MFA. If you haven't enabled MFA for all your users, go now and do that. But remember that not all MFA is strong and phishing resistant. So we want to get stronger MFA credentials. And then conditional access policies can be more granular. So you can use authentication strengths along with conditional access policies to require specific methods to authenticate. And you can go ahead and enable authentication strength to suit the resource that the users are accessing. So thank you. Follow me. I'm on Twitter. I am also on YouTube. I have a channel. I blog, and my blog is at mattchat.co.za/blog, and I am on LinkedIn. So please, look me up. And thank you very much, and have a great holiday season.